It was a summer night in Miami Beach, and the Whitmore mansion shimmered like a diamond over the bay's crystal-clear waters. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway: Lamborghinis, Ferraris, Bentleys, and Rolls-Royces, each costing more than most people's homes. The sound of sophisticated laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses echoed through the perfectly manicured gardens, where every rose had been imported directly from France. Richard Whitmore, a real estate magnate, had thrown this exclusive party to celebrate what he called the investment that changed everything. For months, his company had been on the brink of bankruptcy. A billion-dollar sustainable resort project had faced technical, environmental, and financial problems that seemed impossible to solve. That's when a mysterious investor appeared, offering not only the necessary funds but also innovative solutions no one had thought of before. Tonight's guests represented Miami's elite: heirs to family fortunes, young Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, millionaire digital influencers, and celebrities who earned millions just by posting photos. Everyone wore outfits that cost more than a popular car, sported watches that could buy a house, and casually discussed their yachts, private jets, and summer homes in Europe. At the center of this universe of ostentation, three young people stood out for their arrogance. Marcus Blackwell, 28, had inherited a tech fortune and had never worked a day in his life. His girlfriend, Isabella Rodriguez, was an influencer who earned millions selling beauty products to her followers, while she herself spent fortunes on cosmetic procedures. The third was James Morton, who had created a delivery app that made him a billionaire by age 30, but it also turned him into someone who believed money was the sole measure of a person's worth. They were standing on the main terrace, observing the party's movement, when something caught their attention. An elderly man was slowly walking towards the mansion's entrance. He appeared to be around 70, with wind-blown gray hair and skin weathered by decades of sun exposure. He wore a faded blue and white plaid shirt, simple khaki pants that had seen better days, and brown leather shoes that clearly had many stories to tell. In his calloused hands, he carried a traditional straw hat, the kind fishermen wear to shield themselves from the harsh sea sun. Marcus was the first to notice, nudging his friends with his elbow. "Guys, check this out. I think Grandpa got lost." Isabella let out a malicious giggle, adjusting her platinum hair that had cost $3,000 to style. "Is he looking for the dock? Maybe he mistook our party for a retiree gathering." The old fisherman approached the entrance, where two security guards in black suits watched him suspiciously. He showed something in his wallet, probably an invitation, and after a few minutes of verification, he was allowed in. This only heightened the curiosity and mockery of the trio of rich youngsters. James took a sip of his Dom Perignon champagne, which cost $800 a bottle, and commented, "I can't believe they let this guy in. Look at his clothes. I bet he bought them at the thrift store down the street." Marcus added, "Man, Whitmore must be really desperate for guests if he's inviting any beach bum." The fisherman entered the party and immediately stood out like a fish out of water. While everyone around him wore designer clothes, expensive jewelry, and luxury accessories, he maintained his natural simplicity. He didn't seem embarrassed or intimidated. In fact, there was a serenity in his blue eyes, as if he had already seen all that life could offer. He discreetly made his way to a less crowded corner of the main hall, near one of the large windows overlooking the sea. From there, he silently observed the party's commotion, sometimes smiling gently when he saw something that amused him, other times just contemplating the waves gently breaking on the mansion's private beach. A young waiter, recently hired and eager to impress the VIP guests, noticed the fisherman standing there. Without any discretion, he approached with a tray of the cheapest drinks available, domestic beers that drastically contrasted with the rare wines and French champagnes circulating through the rest of the party. "Would you like something, sir? We have these beers here, they're more suitable for your budget," he said with a condescending smile. The fisherman simply thanked him politely and accepted one of the beers, showing no irritation at the discriminatory treatment. This drew even more attention from the trio of arrogant youths, who had strategically positioned themselves to observe the entire interaction. Isabella couldn't contain herself. She approached the fisherman, her $1,000 heels clicking on the Italian marble floor, followed by her two friends. Darling. Wow, what a surprise to see you here. Tell us, how was the fishing today? Did you catch anything good?" Her voice was sweet as honey, but the sarcasm was evident to anyone paying attention. The fisherman looked at her with those serene eyes and simply replied, "Fishing is always good when you know where to look, young lady." His calm, wise answer seemed to irritate the group even more, as they had expected a defensive or embarrassed reaction. Marcus decided to press. "I imagine it must be tough to be here, sir? I mean, all this luxury, these important people. This must not be exactly your environment, right? Maybe you got lost. The pier is about 2 kilometers from here." He vaguely pointed towards the sea, as if giving directions to someone lost. James joined the taunting, pulling his latest model iPhone from his pocket, a device that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. "Want me to call you an Uber, Grandpa? I can even pay for the ride, considering you probably walked all the way here." The three laughed loudly, drawing the attention of other nearby guests, who began to observe the scene with curiosity. Throughout this public humiliation, the fisherman maintained his admirable composure. He took a calm sip of his beer and simply said, "You are young. You still have much to learn about the deep waters of life." His enigmatic reply left the trio momentarily confused, but they soon returned to laughter, interpreting his words as ramblings from a confused old man. Other guests began to pay attention to the situation. A few seemed uncomfortable with the obvious cruelty, but most simply watched with a kind of morbid curiosity that wealthy people sometimes develop when confronted with those they consider different or inferior. An elegant lady, wearing diamonds that could buy a small town, murmured to her friend, "What a strange situation. How did that man manage to get in here?" Her friend, no less laden with jewelry, replied, "It must be some kind of social experiment by Richard. You know how he likes these eccentricities." Meanwhile, the fisherman continued in his corner, now clearly the center of attention, although he didn't seem to care in the slightest. He observed the people around him with an expression that blended compassion and wisdom, like someone who had been through many storms and learned to find peace even amidst chaos. The party continued for another hour, with a trio of young people making occasional comments about the intruder whenever they passed near him. Other guests also started making whispered jokes, creating an increasingly hostile environment around the silent fisherman. It was then that everything changed dramatically. Richard Whitmore stepped onto the small stage that had been set up in the main hall, accompanied by his wife Patricia and some executives from his company. He took the microphone and asked for the audience's attention. "My dear friends, thank you very much for being here with us tonight. As you know, this event has a very special purpose." The crowd fell silent, all turning their attention to the host. Richard continued, "6 months ago, my company was facing the biggest crisis in its history. Our billion-dollar sustainable resort project, representing 10 years of work and $2 billion of investment, was on the verge of total collapse. Environmental, technical, financial problems. It seemed there was no possible solution. People listened with interest. Many knew about the Whitmore Company's crisis, which had been widely reported in specialized media. Richard continued, "That's when an angel appeared in our lives. An investor who not only brought the necessary capital but also innovative solutions that not even our best engineers had thought of. Someone who understands not only business, but sustainability, marine preservation, clean technology, a true visionary." The curiosity in the room was palpable. Everyone wanted to know who this mysterious savior of the Whitmore fortune was. Richard smiled and continued, "This man asked to keep his identity secret throughout the entire process. He wanted the solutions to be judged on their merits, not on his reputation. But tonight, finally, I can introduce you to the man who not only saved my company but also created hundreds of jobs and a project that will revolutionize sustainable tourism worldwide." The anticipation was almost tangible. All heads turned, searching among the guests for someone who could be the mysterious investor. Many looked at the most well-known businessmen present, speculating who the hero of the night might be. Richard looked directly at the corner where the fisherman was standing, still holding his modest beer. "Master Santiago, would you please join us here on stage?" The silence that followed was deafening. All heads turned in the direction Richard was looking, and there stood the old fisherman, who now calmly walked towards the stage. Marcus, Isabella, and James were paralyzed, their faces going through a sequence of expressions that included shock, confusion, disbelief, and finally, pure terror. The fisherman, now identified as Santiago, walked with the same serenity as always through the crowd that now respectfully parted for him. People who minutes earlier had looked at him with disdain now observed him with a mixture of shock and growing admiration. When Santiago reached the stage, Richard hugged him warmly, tears in his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Eduardo Santiago, better known in international financial circles as the Ghost of Wall Street." By age 40, he had already built a financial empire valued at $12 billion, specializing in sustainable investments and marine preservation. The crowd was in total shock. Richard continued, "Master Santiago retired at 50 and decided to live a simple life, dedicating himself to his passion for fishing and ocean preservation. But he never stopped secretly investing in projects that combine profit with environmental responsibility. In the last 20 years, he has funded over 200 projects around the world, always anonymously." Santiago took the microphone with his calloused hands, and when he spoke, his voice carried the silent authority of someone who had built an empire. "Thank you, Richard. I chose to live simply because I learned that true wealth is not in what you wear or the car you drive. It's in what you build, the impact you make on the world, and how you treat people, especially those you believe can do nothing for you." His eyes swept over the crowd, briefly pausing on the trio of young people who had humiliated him, who were now practically hidden behind other guests. "Tonight was very educational for me. I observed how some people treat those they consider inferior. It's a valuable lesson in character." Marcus felt his legs wobble. Isabella was pale despite all her expensive makeup. James tried to blend into the crowd, wishing he could disappear completely. The waiter who had offered the cheap drinks was practically in a panic, realizing he had insulted one of the richest men on the planet. Santiago continued, "My philosophy has always been simple. The sea doesn't care about the brand of your clothes when you're drowning. What matters is whether you know how to swim. And unfortunately, tonight, I saw many people who still haven't learned to swim in the deep waters of humanity." Richard retook the microphone. "The sustainable resort project that Master Santiago saved is not just a financial investment. It's a model that combines cutting-edge technology with environmental preservation, creating jobs for local fishing communities and setting a new standard for responsible tourism. Thanks to his vision, we transformed a crisis into a revolution." Santiago smiled gently. "The project will employ over 2,000 local fishermen as specialized guides, environmental consultants, and sustainable tourism operators. They will receive decent wages and profit sharing, because they are the ones who truly know the sea. There is no university in the world that teaches what these men and women know about the oceans." The revelation continued to be surreal for everyone present. Richard explained how Santiago had invested $50 million in the project, but it also brought an international network of contacts, proprietary technologies developed by his sustainable companies, and a deep knowledge of marine preservation he had acquired in 2 decades of contemplative fishing. "Master Santiago not only saved our company," Richard said, "he created a model that is being replicated in 12 countries. We are talking about an economic impact of over $5 billion in the next 10 years, all based on sustainability and respect for local communities." Santiago took the microphone again. "I could have arrived here by helicopter, wearing a $5,000 tuxedo, and everyone would have treated me with respect from the first moment. But I chose to come as I truly am, a fisherman who loves the sea and believes we can do business without destroying the planet or humiliating people." He paused, his eyes once again finding the trio of young people who were now clearly in a panic. "Tonight, some people offered me cheap beer because they assumed I couldn't afford something better. Others laughed at my clothes and suggested I was lost. Curiously, those same people never asked my name, never wanted to know my story, never showed genuine interest in knowing who I really was." The embarrassment in the room was palpable. Many guests began to recall their own reactions upon seeing Santiago arrive, and they weren't proud of what they remembered. "But I also met interesting people tonight," Santiago continued with a smile. "The waiter who offered me the beer, for example. I later found out he's working 3 jobs to pay for environmental engineering college. We talked for a few minutes about marine preservation, and his ideas are brilliant. By the way, young man, where are you?" The waiter, mortified, stepped forward, trembling. Santiago continued, "I'd like to offer you a full scholarship, plus a paid internship at one of my companies. People with your dedication and passion are exactly what we need to change the world." The transformation was instantaneous. The waiter, who minutes earlier had treated Santiago with condescension for assuming he was poor, was now receiving an opportunity that would change his life forever. The tears in his eyes were of gratitude and also of shame for his initial prejudices. Santiago then directed his attention to the trio of arrogant youths, who were now trying to hide behind a marble column. I also had interesting conversations with some young entrepreneurs tonight. They taught me a lot about how not to judge people by appearances. Marcus, Isabella, and James knew there was no escape. Slowly, they emerged from their makeshift hiding place, their faces red with shame and embarrassment. The crowd watched them with a mix of curiosity and evident disapproval. "You know," Santiago said, his voice still gentle but loaded with wisdom, "when I was young like you, I also made the mistake of judging people by what they seemed to have, not by who they truly were. The difference is that I learned from my mistakes. True maturity isn't about having a lot of money young, but about knowing how to use that money to build bridges, not walls." Isabella tried to approach, mumbling incoherent apologies, but Santiago gently raised his hand. "Don't worry about apologies. Worry about lessons. Your money can buy expensive cars and designer clothes, but it can't buy wisdom, genuine respect, or the peace that comes from knowing you're making a difference in the world." Marcus, gathering courage, finally managed to speak. "Mr. Santiago, we made a terrible mistake. We didn't know who you were." Santiago smiled sadly. "Exactly, young man. You didn't know who I was, but you still treated me poorly. That says more about you than about me." A person's character is revealed not in how they treat their superiors, but in how they treat those they consider inferior. The lesson was being learned in the most public and embarrassing way possible. Richard, sensing the teachable moment, added, "Master Santiago chose to invest in our project not only for profitability, but because our proposal included a strong social component, focused on elevating local communities rather than exploiting them." Santiago concluded his presence on stage with a final reflection. "I returned to the sea at 50 because I discovered that fishing teaches me patience, humility, and respect for nature. Every fish I catch, I do so with gratitude. Every wave I observe reminds me that there are forces much greater than us in this world. Money is just a tool. What matters is how you use that tool." He stepped down from the stage amidst a respectful ovation, very different from the reception he had received upon arrival. People now approached him with genuine admiration and respect, wanting to know more about the man who had revealed himself to be far more than he appeared. For the rest of the night, Santiago was the center of attention, but in a completely different way. He conversed with entrepreneurs about sustainability, with young people about life's purpose, and with other investors about the importance of using capital to create a positive impact on the world. Marcus, Isabella, and James spent the rest of the party trying to redeem themselves, timidly approaching Santiago at different times. To their surprise, he received them with kindness, offering advice on how to use their fortunes and influence more constructively. "You have resources most people will never have," Santiago told Marcus during a later conversation that night. "With those resources comes responsibility. You can choose to use your money to impress people at parties, or you can use it to solve real problems in the world. The choice is yours, but remember, at the end of your life, no one remembers the car you drove, but rather the lives you touched." Isabella, still visibly shaken by the experience, asked, "How can we do better? How can we be more like you?" Santiago smiled. "Start small. Treat people kindly who can do nothing for you. Be curious about others' stories. Remember that everyone has something to teach, regardless of their bank account." James, who had built his fortune through technology, was particularly impressed when Santiago mentioned his own sustainable technology companies. "I've been investing in technologies that solve environmental problems for 2 decades, Santiago explained. "We've developed ocean water purification systems, sustainable aquaculture technologies, and platforms that connect small-scale fishermen to global markets. Technology should serve humanity, not just profit." As the night progressed, Santiago's story became even more impressive. Richard revealed that he had secretly funded hospitals in fishing communities, technical schools in poor coastal regions, and marine preservation programs in over 30 countries. "Master Santiago," Richard explained, "is known in philanthropic circles as the silent benefactor. In the last 20 years, he has donated over $3 billion to causes related to oceans and maritime communities, always anonymously." When the party finally drew to a close in the early morning hours, Santiago stood on the mansion's balcony, watching the sunrise over the sea. A few people joined him in this contemplative moment, including the trio of young people who had humiliated him hours earlier. "You know," Santiago said softly, "I wake up every day at 5 in the morning to fish. Not because I need the fish, not because I need the money, but because the sea teaches me something new every day. Today, for example, I learned that life's most important lessons sometimes come at the most unexpected times." Marcus, with a humility no one had seen in him before, asked, "Mr. Santiago, what will you do now? After all this exposure?" Santiago smiled. "Tomorrow, I'll wake up at 5 in the morning and go fishing. Because I am, first and foremost, a fisherman. The rest is just what I do with the fish I catch." As the guests began to depart, many approached Santiago to exchange contacts, propose partnerships, or simply thank him for the night's lessons. He received everyone with the same serene kindness he had shown throughout the initial humiliation. The waiter who had received the scholarship approached to say goodbye and thank him once more. Santiago advised him, "Study hard, work hard, but never forget where you came from. And when you become successful, and I'm sure you will, remember how you felt tonight and treat everyone with the dignity they deserve." The last people to say goodbye were Marcus, Isabella, and James. They approached together, still clearly embarrassed, but also transformed by the experience. Isabella spoke first. "Mr. Santiago, we don't know how to thank you for tonight's lesson. We promise we'll be different." Santiago looked at them with paternal compassion. "Don't thank me. Thank yourselves for being willing to learn. And remember, it's not enough to promise to be different. You need to act differently, every day, in every interaction, especially when no one is watching." Marcus asked, "Do you forgive us?" Santiago replied, "There's nothing to forgive. You gave me a gift tonight. You reminded me why I chose to live a simple life and why I continue to invest in projects that make a difference. Sometimes, we need to be tested to remember who we truly are." As the young people walked away, visibly changed by the experience, Santiago remained on the balcony, watching the waves. Richard joined him for a final conversation. "Master, thank you for agreeing to reveal yourself tonight." "I know you prefer anonymity," Richard said. Santiago replied, "Sometimes, the most important lessons require us to step out of our comfort zones. Tonight was necessary, not just for those young people, but for all of us." Richard continued, "The project will change hundreds of thousands of lives. How can I thank you adequately?" Santiago smiled. "Continue to be faithful to the principles we established. Remember that true success is measured not only by profits but by the positive impact we make on the world." When he was finally alone on the balcony, Santiago pulled out his simple phone, a basic model that comically contrasted with the latest generation smartphones everyone else used, and called someone. "Hello, dear," he said softly. Yes, the party was educational. No, there were no problems. In fact, it was a very productive night. I met some young people who needed a lesson in humility, and perhaps they learned something. I also found a brilliant young man who's going to study environmental engineering. I've already offered him a scholarship." He paused, listening to the response from the other end of the line. "Yes, love, I'm heading home now. I'll wake up early tomorrow to go fishing. After all, I'm just a fisherman who sometimes does other things." Santiago put his phone away and calmly walked towards the mansion's exit. At the entrance, where hours earlier he had been questioned by security guards, he was now greeted with deep respect. He walked to the street where he had parked his vehicle, a simple 10-year-old Ford pickup truck that he used to transport his fishing gear. It contrasted drastically with the luxury cars that were still being retrieved by the valets. Before leaving, Santiago looked once more at the illuminated mansion, where the party had finally come to an end. He smiled gently, put his straw hat on his head, and drove back to his simple beachfront home, where he would wake up in a few hours for another day of fishing, because, in the end, that's what he truly was, a fisherman who had learned that the greatest fortunes are not in banks, but in the lessons life teaches us and in how we choose to treat our fellow human beings. The story of the millionaire fisherman would quickly spread through Miami's social circles, becoming an urban legend about humility, wisdom, and the importance of never judging a book by its cover. But for Santiago, it would just be another day the sea taught him something valuable about human nature.